Hey guys, Brie here from Mission Block Crochet, and I am so ready to share with you the Red Heart all-in-one granny square yarn. Let's get into it. If you've been following along for a minute, you'll know that I've been on the search for this yarn. The all-in-one granny square yarn is supposed to self-stripe so that you end up with a 5-row granny square and you only have 2 ends to weave in. You're starting and you're ending. I love that idea. I hate weaving in ends. And when I went ahead and I looked online, I thought that the colors that they chose to put together were great. So no mental exhaustion from trying to match up just the right colors, and no mental exhaustion of convincing myself to weave in all those ends. I like that idea. I'm a bit skeptical though. Let me tell you some of my worries going into it before I tell you everything came out. For one, I'm concerned that as I crochet, is it really going to stripe up, the way that they're claiming? Are the transitions going to be clean? Are they going to be muddy? I mean, that could be a deal breaker depending on how muddied the colors are. Or are they going to be is it going to look like going, directly from one color into the next? So I was concerned about that. Concerned about trying to hit gauge, because the ball band just says that, 1 square, 5 rows is supposed to be 6 inches. So I was a little skeptical going into that, because I'm like, that's, I'd have to crochet an entire square. But obviously you'll figure it out pretty quick, because when you get to the end of one row, and if the color doesn't transition, or if you're in the middle of a row and the color transitions, obviously you're not hitting gauge. So, I guess that's kind of self-explanatory. You don't have to have, anything too exact with that, with your gauge, because, you're going to know pretty quick. So I was concerned about that. My biggest concern though is when I finish a square and I cut my yarn, I've got to leave obviously enough to be able to weave in my end. Am I going to be cutting into the first color of the next square and not have enough to complete the first row? So I was really worried about that, because I don't think that I leave mine super extra long, the ends I have to weave in, but I like to leave a fair amount, because I don't like to have to struggle to weave in that last little bit. Obviously you only need a couple inches. I like to leave mine on the longer side. So that was something I was aware of, self-aware of, that I would have to be careful with going into this. So those are my concerns. Let's talk about the pros, and then we'll get into the cons. So pros. I think that the colors that are matched up for all the different skeins, I think they all go well together. I like that idea that they look so well, that they go together so well, because sometimes some of these yarn companies can throw out some pretty crazy colors together, and I'm like, I don't like that. I think these are something, no matter which end of the spectrum you're at, you can find something that will work for you. There's some that are more neutrals, or some more bright. There's some that are, kind of more wild colors. There's a nice variety over the different skeins they have. Now, me personally, I chose this color here, which is the Black Cyber Leaf. So it's got blues, greens, and blacks. These are what they're supposed to look like, just so you know. My next positive is that the ball claims it's going to be 14 squares. One ball is going to give you 14 squares. And I ended up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. I actually ended up with 1 extra square. And the amount that was left over was pretty minimal. So, this is very little waste. So, if there would have been enough for another square, obviously I would have made it. But I couldn't believe that. I ended up with 1 extra square, which was pretty awesome. And minimal left over. Those are all some positives. Like I said, I think it looks very nice together. And I will say also, one of my biggest, things was, you know, am I going to have plenty? I mean, let me just show you a couple here. I don't really have any, I think, that the ends are too short. So I did not weave them in on purpose. I mean, I've got some that there's a lot between, but most of them have plenty. I don't have any that I'm concerned like, ooh, how am I going to weave that in? There was definitely plenty between each. So, I mean, this one's excessively long. So these are all positives. As far as negatives, I do have a couple. For one, like the color changes aren't as clean cut as I was hoping. If that bothers you that they're not really clean cut, then this might not be the yarn for you. Let me just hold this one up here. You can see like right here, there's like some black like muddied into it. You can see like, obviously this part's not really going to matter because it's going to get woven in and cut off, but the colors are muddied here. I mean, you could see, this is just, you know, like one example. This is, you can see here, like this color, the transition's happening pretty quick, but they're kind of muddied at the same time. Because if you look at the back, if you look at the back right here, you could see the muddied. It's not what I was hoping for. I was hoping it to be very clean cut from one to the other. Most, you know, yarns I've worked with that are like a self-striping like this is, like most are, it's pretty, you know, there might be a little bit of muddying, but usually you don't notice it. With these, I mean, it's noticeable. Here's a different square. You can see there's some muddying here, some over here. I mean, this one, they're very muddied. I hope you can see that well. Like they're very, very muddied. So, I mean, that's something you need to be aware of. I don't think it's a total deal breaker, but it's something to be aware of going forward. Now, my other negative, which is kind of, I think, that one's, you know, it's kind of a neutral negative because, I mean, it kind of depends on your personality type if you're going to be okay with there being some muddied color in there. But the one that could be a deal breaker is, for me, I had a very hard time getting the colors to like transition where they were supposed to like hit engage. On some of the rows, and I mean, it varies not just from like square to square, but row to row, it varies also. That when I'd go to transition, I'm like, oh wait, I've got, you know, way too much left of, you know, the color I'm currently using, or not enough. Like I felt like row to row that my gauge varied. I felt like I had to vary my tension from row to row. Now, I mean, obviously my squares came out fine. You know, I don't have any that like I have a full cluster that are like the wrong color. I didn't end up with anything like that. So, you know, I spent quite a few rows. I'd go ahead and frog back and I'd have to like redo like the row or the last few stitches because, you know, sometimes, you know, like it would be, I'd have to have like the last couple, you know, of clusters so tight that then my square was looking wonky. So that's something to be aware of. Now, what I found that worked for me to kind of solve that problem is when I would do each color, I would pull out all the yarn that was that color. So, you know, I'd pull out like all this darker green color, you know, and then I'd do that row. And then I'd pull out all this lighter green, do that row, you know, and so on and so forth. This way I had a visual. I could look at my skein and be, you know, what I'd pulled off from the skein, I could look at it and be like, okay, you know, I'm getting, you know, I'm like about halfway through. I should be about halfway through all the yarn, you know, and I could kind of, you know, gauge it that way. But I do feel like that it varied from row to row because some of the rows I felt like were real loosey goosey. Some of them, you know, I had to do on the tighter side. Now, I never had to crochet extremely tightly to get through any row. I never had that happen, but I have felt, and I personally don't think of myself as crocheting tightly. I'm kind of more of a loosey-goosey gauge most of the time. I usually have to tighten up my gauge. With this, I felt like I had to be really loose sometimes with my gauge, where I'm just like, wow, like felt like my stitches were looking real tall. So those are a couple things going into it. Like I said, pulling out that yarn for each color from the ball, so I had a visual of how much I had to work with. That seemed to help a lot. That's kind of my tip from me to you. Overall though, would I use these again? Yes. Definitely yes, I would use them again. Now, my thought though is I really like the colors they put together. I like a self-striping yarn. There's nothing to say you could only make granny squares with these. Like, I saw somebody making a hat and they used this kind of yarn, and like it striped up really cool, like really pretty. So I could see myself buying this just because it's a self-striping yarn that have great colors that are matched together, especially this one. This is definitely my favorite. I was very happy to get my hands on it. But yeah, I definitely would say I still recommend it, but these are things to be aware of going into it. The positives, the negatives. And it would be great for not just granny squares. It could be great for, hats, self-striping blanket, self-striping scarf. Like, nothing to say you have to use it for granny squares. I mean, obviously, granny squares were what they're designed to do, but crocheting does not have to be an exact science. There isn't one right way to do anything. It is your journey. It is your choice on how you want to do it. I mean, obviously there's some science, there's some math and things that go into it. Not saying there isn't, but I'm saying it is your journey. It is, you do it how you want to do it, because there isn't a wrong way. I mean, if you put your hook in a different spot in the, whatever, it's your journey. You do you. But all in all, recommend. Before I totally let you go, I'm going to let you know that Sunday is my birthday. And every year I like to make my own tiara. One year I used like pop tabs and pipe cleaners, and I made like the silver tiara. I've crocheted tiaras before. Last year was like crazy year. So like I don't think I ever made a tiara last year. Like we barely like celebrated my birthday because life went nuts out last January. This year, though, I have fully intention of being back on track and making a tiara like I always do. This year, though, I may have totally lost my mind because I decided to use thread, which I never work with. Like, I don't think I've ever worked with thread. I mean, I can't recall a time I have ever. So that's going to be coming up, and I'll be learning some new skills about like starching projects a different way than I normally would. So that's going to be coming up in the near future. Stay tuned because I'm very excited about sharing this year's tiara with you. But till next week, take care.